back to my channel, and today we are going to talk about FASD and sensory processing disorder. Now, what is sensory processing disorder? So I'm reading from WebMD. Sensory processing disorder is a condition in which the brain has trouble receiving and responding to information that comes in through the senses. Formally referred to as sensory integration dysfunction, it is not a current recognized as a distinct medical diagnosis. Sensory processing disorder tends to be linked to people that have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, autism, ADHD, PTSD, CPTSD, and other developmental disabilities. To preface that everybody, disabled, developmental disabilities or not, can have some point of sensory distress. The difference between a normal person having sensory distress or someone, let's say, with FASD having some sensory distress is the way that our bodies are able to process it and be able to cope with it. Someone who has a normal sensory functioning system might have uncomfortable sensory experiences but can go through the day relatively okay. Someone with FASD will have a sensory experience and it might be very uncomfortable for them, and they might very much struggle with being able to continue their day-to-day activity. People with FASD can struggle with all of their 8 senses. Those 8 senses that can be affected by sensory processing disorder and FASD are visual, auditory, your smell, your taste, tactile, which is touch, your vestibular, which is a sense of head movement in space, proprioception, which is the sense from muscles and joints of the body, and the 8th is interoception, the ability to feel internally what your body needs. I'm just going to go over vestibular, proprioception, and interoception so you guys have a little bit more understanding of what those 3 are. Vestibular system. The vestibular system contributes to balance and orientation in space. It is the leading system informing us about movement and position of head relative to gravity. That is vestibular system. The proprioceptive system, sometimes abbreviated as PROP by therapists when they talk about it, senses the position, location, orientation, and movement of the body's muscles and joints. Proprioception provides us with the sense of the relative position of neighboring parts of the body and effort used to move body parts. Interoception refers to the sensation related to the physiological and physical condition of the body. Interoception are internal senses that provide a sense of what our internal organs are feeling: hunger and thirst. Our feeling of our heart rate, and I think it also works with our autonomic nervous system. Now, how does this relate to FASD? Well, unfortunately, when a child is exposed to prenatal alcohol exposure in the womb, the alcohol, one of the things it triggers and damages is the central nervous system. One of the ways that our sensory systems can be affected is we can be what is called hypersensitive or hyposensitive. Hyper means to be having a heightened sense sometimes, like I have a hyper sense of smell. The examples that I can give when it comes to hyposensitivity is that I'm hyposensitive when it comes to my vestibular system, which means I need vestibular input throughout the day. One of the ways I achieve vestibular input is I actually will go to the park and go swing on the swings. That's a great way to get vestibular input. Now, how do we manage sensory processing disorder when it comes to FASD? One of the things that I did was something called sensory integration therapy. Sensory integration therapy tends to be done with an occupational therapist. I did both occupational therapy and sensory integration therapy. Sensory integration was one of my favorite therapies, and I truly believed it helped with my sensory issues. There's a whole range of issues people with sensory processing disorder can have. Some of my issues was dealt with when it comes to touch, because I'm hypersensitive to touch. My hearing is hypersensitive, so I can get very overwhelmed with noises. I still have to cover my ears every time I walk down a street and a fire engine comes by or a police vehicle comes by. I'm like covering my ears and huddling. What else? When I was in school, assemblies were awful. I hated doing school assemblies, and so my EA, my educational assistant who was with me, would actually have to take me out of the assemblies a lot of the time, and we would have to sit outside. I've talked about this before, but I have a lot of issues with sensory stuff when it comes to dental. So the dentist is just a sensory nightmare for me, and I am not someone, I don't know if you've noticed, who wears makeup because I can't stand anything on my face. So I don't do mascara, I don't do lip gloss, I don't do the whole makeup tutorial. So sorry, you will not be getting a makeup tutorial on this channel. Some of the things I did in sensory integration therapy that helped me was we did what is called brushing therapy, and it's usually a small brush, and they literally, that's what they do. They brush your arms up and down, sometimes your legs, sometimes your back, to help with the tactile sensation of touch. We played with, I loved it so much. We played with a trapeze, a swinging trapeze, and we would tie it up super, super tight and hold on, and we'd then spin super, super fast. We absolutely love that, and that integrated our vestibular system. So yet again, as I explained earlier, swinging is a very good sensory thing that I have to do. Unfortunately, I don't get to do it as much in the winter time, so I'm like, it's getting to be spring, and I am dying to go to the park and swing. Like I said, they had trapeze. They had a big swing. It was rectangular, and we would lie on our stomachs, and we would grab things off the floor for the therapist. They had netted swing. We would do obstacle courses. We would work on a whole bunch of things. I also did a lot of therapy, sensory integration therapy at home. I've been very lucky in that my mom is so creative, and she would go to Home Depot and buy a long wooden dowel to make a trapeze for us in our basement. She took a huge board plank to make a swing for us so that we could do activities also down in our basement. I had two, what we would call workers. They were teenagers that were under some sort of company that was kind of like a respite for parents. And so two teenagers came into my house, and they became one of my best support systems, and I love them so much. They did a lot of therapy with us. My mom would teach them, and then they would do it with us down in the basement. One of the things I remember them doing was obstacle courses with us, which was really important for us. So we would climb over things, we would grab things, we would roll, we would tumble. It was a whole thing, and it got our sensory systems moving and working and functioning the way that they should. People often don't realize that young kids with FASD, ADHD, autism, or any developmental disabilities, a lot of times their meltdowns can be associated with needing sensory input or needing less sensory input. Unfortunately, when kids do not get the opportunity to get diagnosed with sensory processing disorder or be able to get sensory integration therapy, it can really, really affect their quality and daily life. The task of putting on clothing can be a nightmare with someone with sensory issues because clothing is a huge sensory experience. I do not like tags on my clothes. Tags is a big trigger for me, and I a lot of times have to take tags out of my clothes. Seams is another huge one. I'm very lucky that I really like wearing jeans, and I think that contributes to my sensory needs and sensory wants. I find jeans to be super heavy for me, and I really like that feeling of heaviness. But someone who might not like jeans, the seams of jeans could just be an absolute nightmare for them. I'm going to read some sensory activities that you could do yourself to help with maybe some sensory processing that you might be struggling with. And I want to make this very, very clear. Yes, you see this word sensory play, and you tend to associate it with children. I want to make it very clear, if you have sensory issues, you might think about doing some of these quote-unquote sensory play to help with your sensory needs. You do not need to be a child to do this, and it is okay as an adult to start experiencing sensory play for yourself. Vestibular activities is 100 seconds of spinning. Spinning is a huge one. Doing relay circuits like 10 jumping jacks, 10 cartwheels, 10 somersaults, 100 seconds of free to stance, dancing. As an adult, you're home alone, get some music on and start dancing around your house or an apartment. No one's gonna see you. Dancing is a great vestibular activity. I like this one for vestibular is rocking and swinging in a hammock. That's a good one too. Also just rocking. Rocking's great for vestibular input. If you have a rocking chair at home, go sit in your rocking chair and rock for like a couple of minutes. Just listen to some music and start rocking. That reminds me, my mom had a sensory bin that was full of these like beads, and she would hide things in them, and that was good for tactile stimulation because I think we had to close our eyes and try to find something, and so that was always fun to do. One is, like I said, for tactile, is sensory bins, shaving cream, which my mom and parents both did, and I absolutely hated. Yeah, it said shaving cream and I just shivered. So that's a good point to bring up because a lot of people with sensory issues can be either sensory seeking or sensory avoidant. And with some of my sensory issues like touch, I avoid getting messy. And one of the things that my parents did before they realized I had some major sensory issues, we had shaving cream activities, and my mom would put it all over us, and I absolutely hated it because she thought it would desensitize us. Now I can't stand the smell of shaving cream, and it makes me want to curl up in a ball and have nothing to do with it. It can be really dangerous for a child to have such a visceral reaction to sensory stimulation that they can actually end up hurting themselves. And that's a lot of things that we don't necessarily want to talk about or like are taboo in the disability community when it comes to sensory processing disorder. But yeah, it can become so bad that kids and adults end up self-harming, which is like, ooh, that's really not good. So going through sensory therapies and doing things at home might be really important to make sure those children and adults don't end up doing those self-harm acts. It's really important that you yourself and caregivers know when to push someone with sensory processing disorder and when to stay back and stand back and be like, okay, maybe this pushing isn't worth it because you don't want to do more harm. So I think that is all that I'm going to talk about when it comes to FASD and sensory processing disorder. It is a huge topic, and I probably missed a whole bunch of things, but it is something that I'm really, really fascinated on, and I love talking about it with people. And sensory integration, like I said before, was one of my favorite therapies to do as a kid, and I think it was a huge contributing factor to why I'm able to manage my sensory needs and sensory wants so well as a 29-year-old. Let me know if I missed anything in the comment section. And with that being said, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Bye, guys!